Hi, everybody. I hope you remember me. I'm here with my grandson Cam, and today I'd like to tell you a few things about the Vietnam War. But Cam is going to have to say goodbye because the Vietnam War is PG-13. Okay, couple of things I want to tell you about. First of all, these are some of the major problems the United States faced in Vietnam. One of the major problems you had is the way in which President Lyndon Johnson mismanaged the war. He was, number one, he was afraid of producing a much greater war, somehow winding up in a direct confrontation with the Soviet Union and with communist China. That was a major concern of his. He did not want to see a repeat of the Korean War. That was problem number one. And that problem number one sort of leads to problem number two, in which the President of the United States was micromanaging the war effort in Vietnam. Normally, the United States military uses something called mission tactics. That's where the commander, right, makes his intent clear, and then the subordinates are left to carry out the mission in the best way possible. And almost always, you're kind of pushing responsibility down to the lowest level. You're letting the man on the spot make decisions as long as they are guided by the intent of the commander. That's not what was happening in Vietnam. What was happening in Vietnam is that the war was being micromanaged by the White House. President Johnson, President of the United States, was actually sitting at his desk in the Oval Office and essentially picking out targets for the next day's bombing. He controlled the targets that were being used. In this period of time early in the war called Operation Rolling Thunder, there was a tremendous amount of bombing going on, but they weren't really bombing effectively. Well, for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's really hard to hit stuff with bombs back in the day. This is before the advent of smart weapons and guided munitions like we use today. They were just letting loose with dumb bombs, and dumb bombs tend not to go where you want them to go. They tend to hit everything except what you're shooting at. I think the average miss distance on a bomb is about 100 meters or about 110, 120 yards. So that was problem number one with bombing, is it's very hard to hit stuff, when you're flying real fast and you're flying real high. Problem number one. Problem number two was that there were all kinds of targets that were off limits, right? All kinds of targets that would have seriously hampered the North Vietnamese war effort, but because of the fear that these targets would somehow draw the Soviet Union or the Chinese into the war, they were not allowed to pursue these targets. So the effectiveness of the bombing campaign was very limited early on. Now, perhaps the biggest problem we had was the steady deterioration of the leadership on the platoon and the squad level in the United States Army. At the beginning of the Vietnam War, we had a very good Army with a tremendous number of professional sergeants and a tremendous number of ROTC and West Point graduate lieutenants. Early in the war, our units trained together, they deployed together, they fought together, they knew each other, they had that camaraderie built into the system. But as the war progressed, attrition started to take over. Platoon leaders get promoted to company command. They rotate back to the United States to take on schooling and other assignments. Unfortunately, some of the better platoon leaders tended to get killed or seriously wounded because they took chances and risks and they led in front of their men. We see that as the war progresses, the number of professional and competent NCOs, platoon sergeants, sergeant majors, first sergeants, the backbone of any army is the non-commissioned officer, and they're starting to degrade in quality also. So you have young men, 18, 19 years old, graduate from high school, get drafted, head off to boot camp, a little bit of advanced infantry training, boom, they're 19 years old, they're in Vietnam, and the leadership that they needed simply, in many instances, was not there. I want to read you from a book called Platoon Leader, which was written by a fellow by the name of McDonough, who took command of a platoon in Vietnam in the year 1970, which is getting really late in the war and is right in the middle of that noticeable deterioration in the quality of the leadership on the platoon level. So I want to set this up. He is just arriving in Vietnam. He is being flown out to a village that is being defended by a platoon of U.S. Army soldiers. Okay, the village is in the valley. The platoon is dug in on a hilltop. He's about to meet the platoon commander he is to relieve. So that's where the story picks up. Hello, I'm Jim McDonough, I said, feeling somewhat awkward being so formal while lying on my stomach. Tom Rolfe, he said, are you here to take my place? He was unable to conceal the eagerness. Yes, I replied. Can you tell me what's going on here? As he began briefing me, it became apparent that the platoon was not the object of his thoughts. I asked questions about the dispositions of the squads, the personalities of the men, the tactics of the enemy, the attitude of the villagers. He responded by telling me about how difficult the job was, how much his family needed him, how he had never asked to be an infantry lieutenant, how dangerous and uncomfortable his life had been of late, and how he did not deserve to be wounded or killed. He was overcome by the fear that on this last night in the field, the enemy would somehow snatch survival away from him. As the hours passed and we did not move from our position in the midst of the platoon, I became acutely aware, conscious of our protected posture. All about us I could hear movement. I saw the silhouettes of soldiers as they moved about, setting up their positions for the night. I noted that at least one patrol departed from the perimeter, but that the orders for the patrol did not come from the lieutenant. Rolfe lay there, chattering aimlessly into the night, describing again and again for me the wife and the 2 children he had left behind. Gradually he honed in on his point. You've got to understand, I did this for them. They need me. They need me in one piece. Nervous silence followed as I tried to find his eyes in the darkness. What was he talking about? The question arose even as the answer was forming all around me. They know what to do. They're good soldiers. Silence again. He was shocked by his own confession, but at the same time, he was urged on by the bearing of his soul. I could have become a hero. Sometimes I even wanted to be. But I had to think of my family, you see. Don't you? Most of these men don't have any family. They're just boys. The shamefulness of the words hit me like a club. He was not the leader of this platoon. He felt no responsibility for the mission. He felt no compassion for the men. In his mind, the other members of the platoon existed for only one reason: to protect him, to keep him alive. The men were expendable. He was not. He had reason to live. They did not.